Please welcome Sandy Speicher from Stanford University.
Thank you. Thank you for this introduction, and thank you for inviting me here to your beautiful city. This is my first time in Budapest. Everybody asks me that. And I've decided not only is it absolutely beautiful, but you have the best weather in November possible. Is it always like this? Yeah, I'm already planning my trip for next November. So I would like to jump right in with a question. Have you noticed how unsettling the world has become? How we have huge challenges like global warming that are affecting us in ways we have no idea how to do anything about? How organizations like Uber and Airbnb are challenging a lot of the ways that we've set up our government systems? This image is about a challenge in California where they're deciding whether or not Uber employees can be contractors because Uber's policies are betraying a lot of the protections the government has set up for employees. And I know that in Europe, there are a lot of challenges with Uber happening as well. It feels like we are inundated every day with challenges that we have no idea how to handle, either emotionally or in our systems. I think this image might be familiar to many of you. But I like to think also about how the world is changing from the human side. So we are connected in ways that we've never been before. I know this image is old, I just keep it in because I love it so much. Here's a kid talking to all of his grandparents at once. Everyone, no matter where they are, has a voice these days in public conversations. And I also love this image because I think, would this have ever happened with other US presidents? And everywhere in the globe, we're consumed by our personal technologies that are actually giving us this ability to connect, to consume, to share. I love this image. Does anybody know what this is? There's a street in the UK that they had to line all of the light poles with foam because people were injuring themselves so often walking down the street looking at their phones. So I think you get my point, actually. I think you probably feel it. The pace of innovation in the world, driven through this explosion of access and connectivity, is outpacing our ability to respond. From government policies to business structures to education systems, our social fabric is struggling to keep up. It's clear that we need people who can manage through this uncertainty. And yet, we need people who also still have a grounded framework for how to lead so that we're not just blowing up everything that we've designed over the years. But if we look into our classrooms, which is the very place that we're preparing our leaders for the future, we're leaving students bored, disengaged, and managing to a set of expectations that are quite different from the way they're living in the world. We're simply not preparing youth for the world of today, much less to create the world of tomorrow. These are, of course, systemic challenges which make it hard for us to feel empowered to change. And it says here, but everyone knows we have a problem. I always like to joke that if you talk to anybody in education, whether it's a parent or a teacher or a janitor, anybody who works in education, and you say, how was your day? Within, 5 minutes, you're going to hear, and the whole system is messed up. You guys had that experience? Have you thought it yourself? It's the same in every country that I've researched. Everybody feels that the system is the barrier. We hear from businesses, governments, and economic forces also that things need to change. There's a great survey that IBM did, this global CEO survey, where they talked to CEOs all around the globe, and they said, what are the most important skills for leadership in the future? And creativity, integrity, and global thinking came up as the top skills. As part of that survey, they also asked what leaders today need in order to be effective at their work. And these skills of being comfortable with ambiguity, being able to innovate not just on the product, but on the organization itself, these are the things that came up as the needs that they all have. And the World Economic Forum created this really excellent report about what schools need for the future. And they listed these wonderful things like the foundational literacies, which we all know that are important, literacy, numeracy. But they raised the possibility of the development of certain competencies like creativity, like communication, and these character qualities like persistence and grit as really important skills and behaviors and dispositions that we all need to develop for the future. It starts to feel like a lot of lists, doesn't it? With a lot of words we all believe in, but we don't know necessarily what to do with them. As I look at these lists, I see this term, creative leadership, that underlies all of them. And what helps me about this is that we kind of can orient around saying it's not just that we need leadership for the future, we need creative leadership for the future. We have to value these other skills that help us innovate and help us invent so we can keep up with the way the world is changing. So let's, again, look back to our classrooms. Before I just attack every classroom in the world and say none of it's good enough, I want to do a little thought exercise with you all. I had a professor who used to say, if an alien dropped in our classrooms, what would he think is happening? So let's play with that for a second. There's our alien, he's dropped into a classroom. What would he think is happening here? He might say, people are learning to sit in rows and to override what their bodies might need at that moment. He might say that we're training people to move at the sound of a bell. Did any of you jump? He might also, in looking deeper, start to think, oh, well, maybe this is all about people guessing what the person in the front of the room already knows. At the end of his time, the alien might conclude that our schools are very well designed to create citizens for an industrial age, preparing to be one of the masses, preparing to sit still, preparing to move on command, preparing for the execution of known knowledge. And whether he came into those classrooms in 1890 or today, he might actually conclude the same thing. But we know the world has changed. We've evolved from just those industrial needs now into a whole new time of innovation, information, and participation. I think that one of the most important things for us to realize is that these schools are a set of decisions that we've made at a point in time. It's a set of decisions we continue to make. What is the reason we're doing it? How should we do it? What is the curriculum? How are we going to design the role of the teacher? Everything about schools are actually designed experiences. I think this is important to realize because once we realize it's been designed, then we can make choices to redesign it. It's very hard, actually, for so many reasons. One of them being, we all were children in school at one point. We all, maybe many of you probably even have children in school at this point. And so there's a certain way we understand things to be. And if we want those to change, it's actually very hard to imagine outside of that. It's probably appropriate in this building to say, school is the water we all swam in. And so it's hard to imagine anything other than the way it's been designed. So I realized I've jumped in and shared all of this with you without actually giving you any context for who I am and where I'm coming from. So I work at an organization called IDEO. IDEO is a design and innovation consultancy. So we help organizations innovate. That's our role in the world. We started about 30 years ago, designing the first mouse for Apple. So a lot of people know us for that. But now we've taken that same process that we used to design that mouse to all kinds of other questions, like how healthcare is delivered. This is an example of a project that we recently did with an organization called PillPack, which looks at how we actually help people stay better on top of the way that they take their medications. So every day, there are packets that are actually distributed when you have multiple medications to take. So you don't have to put those all in your containers yourself. We've been working with governments to redesign the experiences that they're creating for citizens. This is an example of work we've done with the Ministry of Manpower in Singapore to redesign the Work Pass division. How do we actually help a government more nimbly connect with the people that are coming in to work in the country? And we're also rethinking the ways that we are creating our schools, which I'll be talking more about. IDEO has been around for over 30 years. We've got 10 offices around the globe, and about 600 people who are kind of honed to lead creatively. Our job is to imagine new solutions for the future. And there is a process that underlies everything we do. And that I can just simplify by saying is a human-centered approach to solving problems. So when people ask us to, say, design a whole school system, we consistently know that the place we can start is by understanding people. So that doesn't mean we don't think about business or the marketplace or the cost of things. It doesn't mean we don't think about the feasibility, the technical ability to realize what we can imagine. But it means that we start by saying, what do people care about? And how can we make their lives better? And how can we configure the realities of business or the realities of the market and the realities of the technical feasibility in order to create better lives for people? This is a pretty old image now, but I just love, too, how it really makes the point. There are two things to remember about design thinking that I just wanted to highlight. The first is this idea that we're inspired by people. Instead of sitting around and thinking, what should be the next best product, or how can we improve, in this case, the emergency room experience in a hospital? We don't just sit around in a room and say, how do we make it better? We go out and experience, what does it actually feel like? And so this image is a designer on a team who was part of a group that were reimagining the emergency room experience at a hospital. And he checked himself into the hospital. There was like, somewhere on him he wrote like, do not cut, because there was actually nothing wrong with him. But he checked himself into the hospital and he kept a camera by the side of his head the whole time, so that not only could he feel what it felt like to be a patient, but he could show our clients, here's what it looks like. Here's what the patients see through their eyes when they check into your hospital. Can you imagine what that camera might have shown? It's about 5 hours of the ceiling. And occasionally, some head pops in and talks about him, but not to him. And so when the hospital leaders saw this, they were shocked. They didn't even realize that this is the experience that they had created for people. So, being inspired by people. And it's not just about the ideas for people, it's actually trying those things out. So one of the attitudes that we take is we build in order to think. We don't just sit in a room and think. We make things in order to get feedback from people, try those ideas out with them, and have them engage with us to help improve them. This image is an example of work that we did with a hotel chain to redesign their customer experience. And we understood people, we went out, we stayed in the hotels, we learned about it, we came up with all of these ideas, and then we rented a warehouse and we built a full-scale prototype of the things that we had imagined. And then we brought customers in, we brought employees in, we even brought franchisee owners in, and we said, tell us everything you think about this space. Mark it up, give us comments, what could make this better? And so we improved the design just by the nature of asking people to experience it with us. And then this hotel chain actually had the highest adoption they've ever had of franchisee owners implementing new ideas that the central organization had created. So including people in the process is a great way to actually see your ideas live in the world. So this process is often quite different than the way most organizations work. And I think it's not just because of the steps that we do, but it's the mindset that we have when we go about it. Design thinking is empathic, it's optimistic, we believe a better future is possible. It's experimental, we try things out in order to learn about them. And of course, it's collaborative. We bring a lot of different talent together to address these complex questions. So I'm going to bring it back to the questions of education now. You might be wondering how we bridge these two things, design and education. We're using design thinking both to reimagine what we're learning, how are we developing leaders for the future, and how we're learning, how are we designing school systems in order to do that. So I'm going to share some examples of both of those dimensions with you. So the first one, how do we develop creative leaders? So what are we learning? I hear that you guys have heard of this little institution called Stanford University in California. Yes? There's some nodding. I got a smile. Good. Well, Stanford, as you know, is one of the world's most successful institutions, and they're shaking up the way that they're asking students to be learning. Have any of you heard of the design school at Stanford? The D.school? We've got some innovative hands over here. You can now go home and tell your friends you learned about something cool. So the design school at Stanford is an institute that takes students from all different parts of the university and really focuses on how do we develop innovative leaders for the future. So they began with a napkin where a few people were sitting around, including David Kelly, who's the founder of both IDEO and the design school at Stanford. And they said, we need to do something different about the way students are learning. We need to help them develop a new set of skills so that they can take different action in the world. And so they said, we're going to create the best design school. We're going to prepare future innovators. We're going to use design thinking actually as a process for them to learn so they can apply knowledge that they're learning in new ways. And we're going to foster radical collaboration and be project-based. These were their design elements of the D.school. What does that look like in practice? Well, I'm going to give you one example of a class called Design for Extreme Affordability. So in this class, students actually travel to a different part of the globe, and they learn about challenges that people are facing. And in this class, they're focusing on people in poverty. And the question is, can you design something to make their lives better? And these images, that's me, that's not the images. These images are of a group that traveled to Nepal, and they learned about the problems of infant mortality. Many babies were born premature, and many of them were dying. And one of the reasons was that incubators, these little kind of heat units that helped the premature babies survive, they cost about $20,000. Just not possible in a lot of these remote villages. So the team came back, they thought they could do something about it. They ended up designing a device that costs about $20, $25 to make, and they're now, they've graduated from Stanford, and they've gone on to form a nonprofit organization building products for the extreme poor, and they're operating in 11 countries. So at the D.school, they take students from the humanities and students from computer science and students from engineering, students from education, from many different departments, and they put them together in classes where there is not a subject matter orientation, but instead a big challenge as the orientation for how they're learning. And there's a design process that underlies that. So every class at Stanford this is what you're doing. You're going through this design process again and again and again. And in that process, not only are you learning these methods, but you're actually building a confidence in your creative abilities, in your abilities to make a difference in the world around you. There are so many different topics that they teach in these classes. A lot of it has to do with the different professors. In fact, I didn't even put an image of it up here, but last year I taught a class about designing high school. How can we redesign high school? And the spaces look quite different. This is actually a classroom. And so is this. And so is this. Can you spot the teacher in this classroom? It's sort of a trick question because there's actually five professors in this one class, but it's hard to see even where they might be. Can you imagine how it might feel to be a student in this class? It's not just fun, it actually challenges a pretty deep side of you, which is your ability to create with others. So I'm going to take a lot of these same ideas and show you a few different examples. This is about something called the Design for Change School Contest. We collaborated with an educator in India who wanted to help kids realize they can make a difference in the world around them. So we took design process and we adapted it for 10-year-olds. And we created a national contest in India to see what youth might do if they were told, if they were invited to actually solve challenges in their communities. None of you speak Hindi? All right, I'll translate it at least in English. I looked it up. There's no Hungarian translations of these yet. So the process that these students were offered is quite simple. The first step is feel. Go out into your communities and feel the pains that people have. Then the step 2 is imagine. Imagine what you could do to address those pains. The third step is do. Do something about it. Choose one of those ideas and do it. And the fourth step is share. And this was important because we needed students not just to create that impact in the world, but to have adults realize that kids could do this too. So here's what that looks like in action. In this village, a group of kids recognized that a lot of their parents were being kind of taken by faith healers. When they were sick, they were going to these, I don't know, in the US we would say like a snake oil salesman. I don't know if there's a good translation here, but maybe the person in the microphone, in the earphones can come up with something. So these faith healers, they're kind of fake. They're not medical doctors. And a lot of these kids' parents were going to these fake doctors. So they decided to do something about it. And what they did was they organized a performance that they gave in the middle of the village so that adults could see the science behind a lot of the tricks that these fake doctors were playing on them. And then they got about 100 adults to commit to no longer go to these fake doctors, but instead go to medical doctors. And this image, this is from this year. I just learned about this one. I found it inspiring. This group of girls actually recognized that despite the fact that their mothers were quite involved in their education and in their lives, none of the official documents from school or the government included their mother's names. It was always their father's names. And they felt that this was an unfair representation. So they worked with the school leaders, they worked with the local government, and they got the forms changed to include both their fathers and their mothers. Which, if any of you have been to India, especially in pretty remote areas, this is a very radical change. So the first year we did this contest, we saw 1,500 teams enter from all over India. Kids were solving challenges like lack of education and illiteracy, traffic, pollution. And now this contest is being run in 30 countries all around the world. And I have to say, it is not being run in Hungary. So here's how it works. If you're interested in figuring out how to run the contest in this country, do let me know and I will connect you with the organizers. All right, moving past the pitch. So I've got one more story on this kind of train of thought. This is Andrew. Andrew is a 9th grade student at a school called the Henry Ford Learning Institute, which is in Dearborn, Michigan in America. So Andrew actually took a course very much like the ones taught at the D.school. We helped modify this course for high school students. The introductory project was for the students to design a name tag for someone else, like the thing you're wearing around your neck, which, by the way, I thought was a very stupid project because it seems so simple and boring. Design a name tag for somebody else? In my mind, design can solve anything. Why are we having students design something as simple as a name tag? There were a few other projects in this class too. They got increasingly harder as they went through the class. So after the class finished, I interviewed Andrew, and I wanted to learn about how he felt so we could improve the course. So I asked him what his favorite project was. And you know what he told me? The name tag project was his favorite. And I thought, you're kidding me, the name tag project? But a good interviewer doesn't show her feelings. So I said, tell me why you love that project. And he said, in that project, I really learned I was a leader. I learned that I could make something that would make a difference in someone else's life. I learned that I could listen to someone else's needs and that I could do something about it. And I learned that I could make someone's day better. And I thought, well, that's some pretty great learning, actually. I think we could all use a little bit of that. So I said, okay, so you designed a name tag for someone else. That's wonderful. What else might you do with that same process? And he looked to one side, looked to the other side, thought about it a little, and he said, the state economy of Michigan could really use some help. And the school cafeteria, I'd really like to redesign the school cafeteria. And I thought right there, that's exactly what we need. We need to be able to go from, I can design a name tag for someone else, and I can use that same confidence, those same skills, those same methods to redesign the state economy, or to redesign a school cafeteria where I'm uncomfortable at lunch. So that's some context about the ways that we might consider how we develop creative leaders, how we're changing up not just how we're learning, but what we're learning. But a lot of people then say to me, well, you're not really addressing the system in these stories. You're talking about one course. And that's true, or one contest, or one project. But we can use this same design process to actually rethink our systems. So I'm going to share with you now a story about Innova Schools. Innova Schools is an affordable private system in Peru. Peru has, I would be curious, if anybody wants to chat with me after about this, how similar Peru's context might be to Hungary. I'm going to tell you a little bit about their context. As of 2012, Peru is ranked number 65 of 65 countries on the global PISA survey. That means, in a global comparison of education systems across the world, they are dead last. Over the last 10 years, their economy has been growing and stabilizing, and yet their education system is still struggling to improve. In fact, it got worse between the tests that happened a few years earlier. So what Peru is starting to feel, despite their growing economy, is that there's a limit to that growth because they don't have the talent who will actually shepherd that economy in the future. And there's still a rapidly growing middle class, and they're really craving better life opportunities for their kids. The current norms in the schools in Peru are very rote. You have teachers who are saying things in the front of the classroom, and kids transcribe into their notebooks. And so when kids bring home a full notebook, parents think, learning is happening. They have old buildings that are starting to crumble, and they have teachers who are graduating from this poor education system. So their teachers are generally uneducated. And that's one of the biggest challenges to creating a quality education system in Peru, is that it's lacking in quality to start with, which means it's not graduating great talent to be teaching kids in the next cycle. Both teachers and parents really want to do something about this. They want to be a part of the change. They don't want to just execute on what someone else says. They know things need to be different, but they actually have no idea how to do it. They want to learn, and they want to help, But no one really, they need somebody to tell them what good is going to look like. And students, I have to say, students, they were so wonderful to talk to there. They're just like every other kid in the world. They're most happy when their imaginations are engaged. They would show us notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of things they wrote down, and then tell us about their secret projects that they did on the side, that they did at home, the book they read that helped them imagine something that they hadn't thought of before. So Innova Schools decided that they would do something about the problem in the country. They wanted to design a system that would be affordable for the emerging middle class, scalable, grow to enough scale that they could impact the country, and excellent, international quality. Their mission was to build a generation of leaders for their country. So in close collaboration with the Innova team, we had an IDEO team who spent about 6 months working on the ground, trying to figure out how to design an innovative school system that would accomplish all of these goals. And I just thought I'd show you some pictures of what this looks like in action. There's a lot of Post-it notes. There's a lot of drawing and talking and getting feedback from people. And a lot of posters hanging on a wall, a lot of iterating. So in the end, we came to this concept of what Innova Schools would be. And we had to design everything, not just the mission of the school and thinking that everyone can execute on it. We recognized all of these needs of people in the system, and we thought we have to engage students' imagination. We have to help parents and teachers understand how to create what good will look like in these schools. So we designed everything from the academic model, what the curriculum, what the pedagogy would look like, what the spaces would look like, what the schedule would look like, how the tools that they would create that would underlie the system to make it be more effective, how they would define the role of the system, what the underlying financial model would be, and how all of those pieces came together. What that looks like in practice, and this is unique to the conditions of Peru, although I think the conditions of Peru might be quite similar in other places. We created it's called a blended learning model, where we're actually using the best of teaching and the best of technology available to integrate those to help develop students that would learn autonomously. So not just because a teacher is saying it, but have students learn on their own. So we have two different formats. One is more teacher-led, project-based, where teachers are opening an investigative dialogue with students so that they're learning through projects. And then we have something that's a little bit more technology-based and teacher kind of facilitated, where students are using some of the best resources available around the world to gain the basic academic knowledge. I mentioned that teachers were actually one of the struggles in that they haven't been really well taught to become great teachers, and that we were now asking them to do these innovative methodologies, which were not the way that they were taught. So one of the things we had to figure out how to do was to create systems that would let them actually learn and grow. And so one of the things that we did was actually design a standard lesson arc that would allow teachers to work with students in more of a project-based way. Innova created 19,000 lesson plans as a starting point for teachers in a central database called the Teacher Resource Center. And our message to teachers was 70-30. Keep 70% of this lesson, change 30% of it. You can decide what you want to change. But when you change something, put it back in the system so that teachers can learn from each other and that the central office can see who's quite innovative around curriculum design. Now, what's interesting to me about this is we had to find a solution. Instead of giving them scripts where they would just read something that has been proven to work, they did not want that. They wanted their creativity engaged. They wanted to be part of the solution. And yet, they didn't have enough knowledge to really know how to do that. So this is an in-between solution. We're going to give you a starting point and allow you to evolve it. Here's what some of the buildings look like. We actually really recognize that while the emerging middle class had seen a lot of the very fancy private schools that were available, and they wished that they could send their kids there. So we decided that Innova Schools had to be absolutely beautiful, even though they were incredibly low cost. so that parents could feel really proud of dropping their kids off at these schools. Our work with them finished in April 2012, and since then they've actually grown to 29 schools, serving 20,000 kids, and they have about 900 teachers. And within 2 years, we're seeing pretty great results in comparison to the government schools. And, as you might imagine, since I mentioned that they're looking to build a generation of leaders for Peru, this isn't just about how they get better and better at doing more of the same. The model that we help them design brings a lot of the thinking that I mentioned earlier, that looking at what students are learning. We knew it was important to develop the other skills that World Economic Forum chart had, right? The creativity, collaboration, communication, the persistence, the ability to stick with something, the grit, and that determination, those kinds of skills we'd like to see in leaders for the future. And so every year at Inova, the school closes down for 2 weeks, and every student, regardless of age, goes through an innovation program. And in that program, they go through that same process that I shared with you earlier that the kids in India were doing, and they address a social challenge in their community. They learn about the kinds of things that people in their community care about. They bring their academic knowledge to bear. They work together in different ways. The teachers can't determine what's right because they have no idea what the answers will be. The teachers all freak out during this time, I have to be honest. But the kids own it. And then what happens is you see 8-year-olds and 16-year-olds talking to each other about their solutions for the same challenges. So this year, we had 13,500 kids working on social challenges in their communities. So I'm going to bring it back to the beginning now. If you remember that feeling of hearing about how complex our world has become and how we know more and more and more, and we feel like we understand less and less and less. And we know that not just we, but our youth need ways to navigate this world without being totally overwhelmed by it. We need new approaches for solving problems so that we can all create the future that we wish for. And this is where education comes in. And of course, where many of you come in. Because you can actually redesign your systems to address the needs of the future. You can help develop youth into the creative leaders that we need by showing them that they have a role in making the world a better place. Thank you.